Hi, this is Lee Jasper's Drive Time. Got a real special program for you today, but make sure you hit the like button, press subscribe, hit the bell to get your notifications from the channel that is giving you cutting edge news from the black community. Now today we're in Hackney. We've got Charlene Till, who's from America, who's chair of the Massachusetts Cannabis Regulation Board, and she puts the rules and regulations together for the selling of cannabis in Massachusetts. And she's come to us to talk to us about putting marijuana and legislation right here in the United Kingdom. Hi, my name's Lee Jasper. This is Brixton, London, and you're watching Lee Jasper Drive Time.
Yeah, People's Army, stand up, salute. Shout out man like Logic, yeah. Voices in my head, they ain't letting me sleep. I'm feeling torn like the Middle East and angry like a wildebeest. Eyes black like asleep, shit is getting deep now. Can't stop raging like Jay LaMotta. Piano player playing the position, now to make a difference. Tired of wishing for a different condition for our kids to live in. We're living on that.
Transform is a charity and think tank that has been working for over 25 years looking at the problems of the illegal drug market and how we can go about creating a solution to that. And we believe in legally regulated and controlled markets. So this is essentially putting doctors, pharmacists, licensed retailers in control of the drugs market rather than organised criminals. We know that cannabis legalisation is coming to the UK and it's going to come quickly. And we are here today because of the importance of incorporating a social justice agenda, ensuring that those communities that have been most impacted by current drug policies are really put at the heart of future policy making and are put centre stage so that we can make the market more equitable. I think we can see a massive shift over the last few years really, from a sort of almost universal international consensus that prohibition is the way forward, and we've now been having that experiment for well over 50 years, and frankly on all indicators it's massively failing, whether you're looking at levels of overdose, which are currently in the UK at record levels, to mass criminalisation, to the pure economics of how much money we're investing in fighting this drug war. I think there is absolutely a growing recognition that what we're doing simply isn't working, and what we need to do is something that's radically different. And so really what we're talking about is going that rather than dealing with drugs through the criminal justice system, what we need to do is look at it through a health lens. We need to put people who have issues with drugs need to be treated by doctors. They don't need to be put in prison. You know, we've fundamentally been looking at this issue through the wrong lens, and I think there is an absolute appetite now and a recognition of this fact and an appetite to make change happen. Well, I think it's always essential to have the statistics and the evidence that shows what we're doing and is evaluating constantly the impact of policy. That I think is a fundamental thing. Do I think facts always change policy? I run a campaign called Anyone's Child. This is all about telling the real human stories. I think human stories can change policy. I think that the issue of drugs has been so stigmatised and so pushed to one side in our society that it's only when we start to tell the very real stories of the people that are impacted that we can start to make people think differently about that. And we are starting to see that work as a tactic. In Canada, I went there with a mother who'd lost a daughter to an opiates overdose. When the Canadian government announced that they were going to change their policies on cannabis, she was mentioned as the reason for convincing the health minister that they must do something differently. So I know that stories go to the centre stage of policy making. We're watching that in the UK too. In parliamentary debates over the last few years, they're referencing back to families that have been impacted and using this as a political cover to start talking about why we need to change drug policy. Well, I wish it was more prevalent, to be honest, and I fear it's down to massive stigmatisation. I mean, we had 50 years of this policy, which is a very easy message, right? It's drugs are bad, let's ban them, right? What we're trying to do is present a more complicated case around why the merits of legalisation, and I think that messaging has been not got across necessarily, and people are reluctant to speak out on how they've been impacted, and that is something I'm very, very eager to start addressing and to hear some of those stories, because I think they are very powerful narratives and I think people need to hear them. I don't think legalisation is a panacea to all the woes of society. I think that would be a very naive belief. But I also think there are great opportunities for legalisation. I've spent a lot of time as an activist over in America. I think the debate's very different over there. It's my perception. The black voice is much louder, it's much more vocal. It is centre stage to the majority of discussions, whereas I return to the UK and that voice isn't there. And I think that's what this event's really about, is how can we mobilise the black community? This is clearly an issue where disproportionate impacts are being felt by the community. And we need to hear those stories. We need that voice to be vocal. And frankly, I think the BAME community needs to be at the table as policy is devised and implemented, if we really want to start making cannabis legalisation about social justice. And the time is now, because this is coming, and it's coming quick. Yeah. And if we don't mobilise, then I honestly believe that the corporate interests will rule and social justice will be cut out of the equation. The takeaways from today's meetings are, first and foremost, cannabis legalisation is going to be a reality. Second of all, how do we mobilise the BAME community? I think, we've got a positive story to tell. This can be addressed. In New York, they recently passed there was a ballot to legalise cannabis, and it failed not because there wasn't popular support for cannabis legalisation, because it didn't incorporate it enough of a racial justice position. Now that is really, really brilliant progress. Absolutely. But it does show that if we fight and those positions and arguments are understood, then progress can be made. And this is a positive time, because we're at a point when policy will be made. There's a great opportunity there.
Marijuana legalization is coming. There's $1 billion industry coming. Somebody is going to make this money, and we should make sure that it's fair. And we created that coalition. And I will tell you, 6 years later, even though I'm a commissioner, I'm supposed to have this power, we still need to get that coalition together all the time, because they're always, and when I say they, I mean that just in a large sense, they're always trying to thwart that progress. And we always have to get the coalition back together. So start making that today. I mean that figuratively, but I also mean that literally. Sign up for these organizations, meet each other, share information, because you have such an opportunity to make an influence that we don't have anywhere else. So let me briefly recap how I got here. So the Cannabis Control Commission is the agency in Massachusetts that is in charge of implementing legal marijuana. So we make all of the decisions about regulation, we license businesses, we register patients. It's about 60 people. And it's led by 5 commissioners. And under the law, because we demanded it, there are 5 different expertise areas that we represent, which are public health, public safety, business, regulation, and my seat, which is social justice. So every time we make a decision, we come from those 5 angles, and if social justice isn't adequately represented, then we change it until it is. Because under Massachusetts law, as the people demanded, that is part of our goal, that the affected communities have to be included in the industry and positively impacted. I did an interview with The Guardian earlier this week, and I explained some of our programs, and they really liked then they made it a headline, the idea that, I didn't use the word drug dealers, I used the word underground operators, but they made the headline, the UK is being advised by the Massachusetts Commissioner to include and recruit drug dealers into the legal marijuana industry, which is true, but it's actually much bigger than that. You look at a report like this, and it doesn't matter if you're in the drug trade or not, if you're part of an over-policed community, and I don't need to tell you this, you have been affected in a way where if we're going to have responsible regulation of cannabis, it's not just about labeling and packaging and testing, it's about acknowledging. You have to be ready, if you care about this, to be at the center of the conversation now, to frame this from the beginning. And if you're willing, if you're able to stand up and say, I'm part of this community, here's the data, and legalization won't move forward unless it's fair. So specifically Black and Latino people and people from geographically identified areas with higher rates of arrest and incarceration, people with drug convictions, and parents and spouses of people with drug convictions are all part of this program that we call the equity program. Those groups that I mentioned are part of the equity program, where you get technical assistance, you get exclusive access to certain types of licenses, and you get fee waivers, and you get other benefits until we meet this goal of including disproportionately harmed communities in the industry, and we will keep measuring it because it's not about the right talking points and the right words, it's about the actual number and the economics. I'll just tell you from experience that there's something really special about cannabis regulation where it's very disorienting to the existing elites, corporate establishment, the general machine, because there's no playbook. And because everywhere that has legalized cannabis, it's been done truly by the people, not by politicians. Politicians have been dragged along for the ride, and they don't even really understand what's going on. And I've been in a lot of these different places and seen it happen. Take advantage of that disorientation and take advantage of that vacuum, because there will be a point where it's clear that legalization is going to happen, and people will be looking around at each other like, what's going on here? What's the example? Looking for information. My job description to ensure that there's social justice and legalization in Massachusetts, and I think it's as important everywhere else. So I offer all the information that I can to all of these organizations. So I would really encourage you to try and move away from the idea of pro-legalization versus anti-legalization, or pro-cannabis versus anti-cannabis, and look instead at the states that have legalized and think about how they've regulated, because that's really what will determine the impacts of the policy.
Well, it's a relevant conversation, and it has been for 20 years. But by and large, I would argue that it's been predicated by white middle class men and women who have owned this space, and through their lens of drugs policy, it's never really reflected our concerns.
That's right.
And I think as a result, when you see about the need to decriminalize marijuana, which I think is right, but it's never seen through the racial lens, and as such then, it's never tackled what I would argue, and you would argue, was the institutional deficit, the institutional racism, if you like, that has driven a punitive drugs policy disproportionately directed at people of color. It's massive. It's not just employment, it's education, it's housing, it's right across the piece. I remember 10 years or so ago when I was in the Equality and Human Rights Commission dealing with stop and search, and I sat with the then Minister for Policing, and he said to me, the reason why we do stop and search is because these are hot spots. These are hot spots. And I said to him, to his face, I said, if you go into the City of London or you go into the West End and you did a drugs raid, they then would become very quickly hot spots. But you don't. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you target black people and then decide this is where the drugs are, then you perpetuate those actions and say this is where the problem, ignoring, as a matter of fact, that large swathes of society are using recreational drugs, but they're getting a free pass, and it's black groups, it's black communities that are disproportionately targeted. It's a myth. The matter of fact that the release and others transform have all clearly demonstrated that white people use drugs more than black people, and yet when in people's psyche they think that when it comes to drugs it is black people both selling and using. It couldn't be further from the truth in terms of the numbers, because of course every single weekend tens of thousands of young people are using recreational drugs. And often sold between themselves, etc., etc. But the focus is on the small council estate where you get some dealers doing a little bit of dealing. That's where the focus is, that's where the narrative is, that's where the data is coming from. It's a poison narrative, it's a poison national narrative that feels right for the state and particularly the police that they say we're just going by the evidence.
Yeah.
But if they're skewing the evidence,
Yeah.
we have a problem. So it's the political imperative that drives this punitive drugs policy. And as such, then you've got a generation of young people being targeted, being harassed. Many of them are going about their law-abiding business, if you like. And then those that are caught up in it quickly spiral into isolation, anger, frustration, and of course the criminal record, which in effect often ruins their lives. 45%, and it's increasing. So in spite of all our efforts, when you think about this, Lee, that 45% of all youth incarceration is non-white.
It's a scandal, isn't it?
Well, imagine if that translates to the other prison population, the national prison population. 45% of prisons. We represent 5% of the population, 45% of the prison population. I mean, you know, it's a powder keg waiting to explode. The state's number one tool to harass, oppress, and incarcerate black people is through the prism of drugs policy. Because it all starts with stop and search.
Yeah.
And that is the alienation and frustration that tens of thousands of youths are catching hellfire on a daily basis. Is the first thing. And then it's a slippery slope. When you're caught, you're more likely to be charged, you're more likely to get a longer sentence, you're more likely to get less parole, you're more likely to not get treatment once you're in prison. So it's a spiral. And you have to remember, Lee, that for every one person, male or female, that is incarcerated, the ripple effect through the family, no father,
Children.
no mother, no breadwinner,
Yeah.
cascades down to the families and the communities that leaves a community threadbare in terms of its foundations.
Yeah.
We need an adult conversation
Yeah.
around drugs policy. And I would argue, and I think you would, and Michelle Alexander, and our American guest who's here today as well, Jolene, would say that we must be at the front and center of this debate, because it's our communities that are catching hellfire through this drugs policy. I think the first thing is, it's not about the white organisations, it's about us.
Yeah.
And it's about us creating our own space, us creating our own space to have our own voice. And look, we've got an election around the corner. We've got to use our political clout. We can decide who gets the keys to Downing Street and start making demands.
Yeah.
And those demands must be, first and foremost, to the Mayor of London, to whoever gets the number 10 Downing Street, to the crime commissioners, that we need an adult conversation about drugs policy. Because if we have an adult conversation, we will not only take the oxygen out of the knife crime epidemic, because, you know, when you put drugs into a community and they're fighting over their territories, it's our people that die.
Absolutely.
And you know, whether it's in Brixton or whether it's in Edinburgh, people are dying because of this draconian drugs policy that doesn't see it through the prism of public health. We hope that the penny will drop for them, but if it doesn't, we've got to make it happen, Lee. Our community are demanding that we tackle knife crime and tackle some of the worst aspects that are causing hell in our communities. That's what they want. And we're told that this is the magic bullet. That's the problem. What we've got to do is we've got to say to the politicians, we want an adult conversation that deals with the problem, and not the headlines that make ministers look good.
So you need a cause rather than symptoms.
There you go. We've got to drive it, Lee. And you know, I'm pleased that once again you're down in the community. You know, we're down here in Hackney. We're down here with those activists, few in number, but doing great work. And we've got to inspire them. We've got to give them the tools. We've got to support them. We've got to make our case, you know, as ever. But with an election around the corner, I think we've got a great platform, Lee. First of all, we've got, as Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton and others, we've always often got the moral authority, grounded, rooted in social and racial justice. Now we've got to take that with our activist DNA and translate it into effective action.
Things need to be done, and here are a group of people, businesses, groups, individuals who commit to doing them. Put their own money into their own events. We fund everything ourselves. They're a self-help group in the Garveyite tradition of Marcus Garvey, and we're developing a whole legacy agenda for the development of young people coming through as young leaders. We need to build a social movement that is strong, A social movement that cannot be attacked by government, by raiding its headquarters, in jailing its leadership, because we have no leadership. Those that do, lead. Those that invest, lead. Those that put their own money in, lead. But to say who's the chair and who's the leader, that's like nailing jelly to a wall, baby. You can't do that. And neither can the state. So we've got a 21st century conception of our movement. It's intergenerational. So we're looking to develop the young leaders. Well, that means that we've got to get into a mode where we legacy build leadership amongst young people so that they can understand some of the mistakes that we made. We're interested in creating a core black economy. That means when we bring groups and organizations together, we get them to work in their best interest together as consortiums to do things that they couldn't do if they were struggling by themselves. So the more we are together, the happier we will be. Are you with me on that point? So you can join Black Sox, you can come and be a member, you have to subscribe to the values and the training and so on, but moreover, what we're looking for is action. I'll tell you why they stop and search us in such big numbers, because there's a toxic culture of institutionalized racism deep within these institutions that remains alive and kicking today. And I'll tell you something about toxic cultures. It eats policy for breakfast. You can have all the legislation, all the law, all the guidelines, all the whatever you like laid down on paper. If the culture in your organization is racist or sexist or corrupt, then all the laws and legislation and the policy will not mean a damn thing, because the culture will overpower the policy. That's why you can have the Metropolitan Police having award-winning diversity policies, getting the global award for the diversity and the most diverse police service in the entire world, right? They get the award for the policy, but their practice on the level is purely discriminatory. Let me tell you why that is. I'll tell you why that is, because in our community, in our country now, we've got a criminal justice system that is privatized, right? So that means every time a black youth goes to jail, somebody gets paid. The jailer gets paid. The policeman gets paid. The judge gets paid. The architect of the jail gets paid. The jailer gets paid. The probation officer gets paid when it comes out. It costs you 50 grand to keep that child in jail, but it costs you 35 grand to send him to Eton College or Oxford University for a year. But they prefer to pay the 50 grand to all of their, prison industrial business colleagues, rather than give it to us so that we can take kids off the street and send them to Cambridge University or open our own university or whatever it would be. So what you have is that black youth have become commodified. You're worth more in jail than you are on the road. On the road, you're costing them money. They don't have to pay your benefit, but once they put you in jail, everybody feeds off that. Everybody feeds off that. And so what I'm saying is that the motivation for the targeting, the racial targeting of black people under drugs, is because there is a financial incentive in a privatized prison complex where black youth no longer become citizens but become commodities who are worth more to the state in jail than they are on the street. Are you with me on that point? Okay. So moving on to the issue, we've got an apartheid justice system in this country. Katrina will tell you, why is it that a black youth can have 20 pounds of weed in his pocket and a white youth can have 20 pounds of weed in his pocket? We both got no criminal record, we both get arrested. The white youth gets cautioned and the black youth gets facilitated to court and gets a criminal charge. That's not fantasy, that's reality. The objective facts take, in fact, for cocaine it's even worse. You're something like 70% more likely to be charged with cocaine if you're black and a first-time offender than you're white. That means black youth are being force-fed into the system at a lower level of evidential base than their white counterparts. And they say it's all justified by knife crime and gun crime, drug crime. These drug gangs, that's the next thing, the black drug gangs, hoodie on, street light, raining, scuttling about like rats in the gutter, swapping bags here, taking money there. That's how they have us up in the popular imagination. But white people use more drugs than us. They self-admit, when you ask them in the British Crime Survey, and it's done every year as an authoritative survey, how much drugs do you use? White people's uses of drugs is off the chart. You look at black people who are then self-reporting on their own drug use in confidence, so nobody's got any reason to lie. It's a fraction of the white thing. Now, the police and the criminal justice systems know this, but they're not chasing white people around drugs. When's the last time the London Stock Exchange got raided for cocaine? Huh? And let's be clear here about the nature of violence. The violence is a black thing. Disproportionate violence is not a black thing. Disproportionate violence is a poor thing. That's why Scotland and Glasgow had the highest knife crime incidence of any city in the country. Why? They had massive unemployment, generational poverty, long-term deprivation. That's why they had more violence. More black women die at the hands of black men in terms of domestic violence murders than black teenagers die on the road. But why don't we hear about black women as being victims of violence? Because it's not very profitable, is it? But when you look at the white community, they're violent too. Their violence is differently culturally expressed. And so today, that we know in the poorest areas of the country, it was reported just last week, that the number of drug deaths amongst white people is the highest it's ever been. Yeah. Now, our culture, right, doesn't go in for that. Our culture is somewhat more different. But the expression of our poverty is through competition around a multi-billion-pound drug industry that is coterminous with the areas we live. Brixton Market is selling drugs today. Dalston Market is selling drugs tonight. Handsworth is selling drugs tonight. Toxteth is selling drugs tonight. Moss Side is selling drugs tonight. Because the same areas we live are also the areas with the biggest open market drug, some of the biggest open market drugs. So of course in an area like London, you're going to get man fighting over turf because there's more money in London. It's not like Liverpool. Most people are poor. So, you know, they've got a different kind of economy. We're living in the richest capital in the country. And so the stakes are higher. The money's higher. Everything's higher. What's the average black youth unemployment in this country? What's it in London? What is the average black youth unemployment rate in London? 55%. That's higher than the Palestinian youth unemployment rate on the West Bank, Gaza today. We've created a culture of violence amongst our young people, which means that random violence out there now is completely contagious. Because the thing is about violence, it is contagious. You sit down and watch a violent movie, you get a bit jumpy, don't you? If you watch a comedy, you start laughing, don't you? If you watch a tearjerker, you start crying. Why? Because emotion is contagious, and anger is contagious, and violence is contagious. So if you grew up in a violent household, suffered beating, or saw your mother get beat, chances are you're going to be a violent child. Violent individual, unless you've dealt with that trauma. Are you with me on that point? And poor people go through what? More trauma than the rest. Why? Because they're trying to cope with their economic exclusions. You know, we're trying to get a public health approach to tackling knife crime and violence. And that requires us to create a core economy. I can't tell these youths to put down what they're doing and I ain't got nothing else for them to pick up. I've got to find alternative economic pathways for them to do it. And if one thing we could do is get together and get ourselves sorted out so that we could be the lead voice in any cannabis legislation debates, then that's what we should do. Because Lord knows, nobody knows cannabis like we know. We went to drugs policy forums for about 2 years. You know what? Katrina's absolutely right. No black people in the room. Got white people saying, oh, what we need to do for disproportionate stop and search. Got no clue. There's no black people in the room. There should be nothing about us without us.
Yes.
Yeah? Nothing about us without us. So we're calling time on all the organisations. Luckily, Transform woke up and smelled coffee 2 years ago. So we're fine with Transform. But there are a range of other organisations who continually pimp off our profit and make profit out of our pain. I.e., they're representing us, getting millions, and we never see them from one day to the next. That day, for that kind of colonial dispensation, is over in the drugs field. So we'll be definitely seeking your support in getting better representation. How the hell are you going to represent, advocate, get involved, represent whatever, a community when you haven't mastered the brief, you haven't understood exactly what the impact of institutional racism and drugs policy is. Drugs policy, the drug war is a war on us. I want you to get that in your mind. They use cannabis arrests as the starting point for your criminalization. And that's why so many of our young people are in there. And we want to commit to create the centre of gravity here in the United Kingdom on the drugs debate here. You understand me? We don't want them to be have that debate unless they come and talk to us. But to do that, we need you to get involved with Black Sox. We need you to get involved with all our organisations. Organisations like the Manhood Global Academy, you see Davis over there. Organisations like Father to Father here in Hackney, or Code 7 over in Lambeth, or any of the other grassroots organisations who are all part of the Black Sox family. Yeah? We've got the means to be able to raise you. We've got the means to be able to mentor you. We've got the means to be able to inform you so you can go out there and represent and make sure we keep our hands in, keep some skin in this legalisation fight. But it's not going to cure institutionalised racism. And it's dishonest for white people and white organisations to say, oh, if we just legalise weed, everything will be all right for black people. That doesn't cure institutionalised racism, and it'll come nowhere near doing so. But thank you very much for listening.